Okay, welcome to the Scottish Property Podcast, Steven Easton. Thanks very much for joining us.
Hi there, guys. Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Great stuff. Now, I've listened to a couple of podcasts that you've been on, Steven, so I know you've got a great story to tell. One of the reasons why we've got you in here today. So just for our listeners, can you just give the listeners a little bit about, what you do and what your background is?
Sure. So my name's Steven Easton, and I'm involved in two businesses. The first one is a family business called Easton Group, and that's all about property and investment. So most of that is a property portfolio that we have. We've got about 400 properties there, about 3/4 on housing, and the rest are commercial properties. And then I've also got a business called Green Home Systems, and that's all about energy efficiency in the home. So the type of products that we install are insulation, and all the fabric of the building from the roof all the way down to the floor, and then energy efficient heating systems, and we do a lot of renewable technologies, so air source heat pumps, solar panels, those kind of things. And we do a lot of work with families that are in fuel poverty. We do a lot of work with landlords. We can access grant funding to help ease the pain with that. And essentially, when we're finished a project, we'll take it from quite low down in the EPC band up to the top. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, landlord hat on and my energy efficiency hat as well.
Great. I think that's going to be huge value to listeners because we can look at it, like you say, from the landlord point of view, and obviously from the whole greener homes and all these changes that are coming in with the government as well. So I think if we split it into two, Steven, and just start off with the property stuff.
Okay.
How did you become, you and your family become involved in investing in property at the start?
So it started with my dad. He, when he was a young man, he didn't really like school very much, so he didn't go. And instead he went to the bookie shops. But what he found, or what he quickly discovered, is that the only guys that really make the money are the ones that side of the counter. And so when he was 21, he started his first business. He opened a betting shop, did really well. And this is when betting shops were really deregulated. They first appeared in the high street, built them up over a period of about 10 years. And then in the 80s, there was a lot of consolidation in the market. And the big boys came in and essentially bought him out. But what they said is, we want the business, but we don't want the property. And so they said, you hold on to the property, we'll do a 20-year lease, and we'll just rent it from you. And so he kind of became a bit of a landlord through default. He then invested in a few different businesses. Some worked out well, some didn't work out so well. But what he kind of quickly realised was that he was quite good at property and investment. And then this is about the point where me and my siblings are on the scene. And when I was at school, I was quite good at maths. And my dad thought he'd put that to good use in his business, got me doing his books for him. So I was 11 years old, and he gave me his accounts to do. And I think it was just the fact that he didn't really like doing them himself, so he just palmed them off to me. This was before computers, so it was really like an old ledger. Mm-hmm. And basically my job was just to kind of write out all the transactions, get it all to square, and then keep the books square. And what my dad would do is, he didn't really know a lot about accounts, but he knew what he needed to know. He taught me that. And then he'd take me along to meetings with accountants, and I would just sit there and ask the guys questions about this, that, and the next thing. And before I knew it, I was really learning a lot and developed a skill set there. He'd take me along to meetings with solicitors and chartered surveyors and all these kind of things. And I would just sit and listen and absorb it all like a sponge. And then I suppose I kind of went from being the wee boy sitting in the corner room to a young man kind of really participating in the meetings. And then after school, I went to university, got a degree, got something I wanted to do. And then after that, I came back and joined the family business full time.
Did you get a degree in accountancy?
No, I don't. No, I've actually got 2 degrees. I've got a degree in politics because it's a subject I really like, and then I've got a master's degree in real estate, which is essentially what chartered surveyors do. Mm-hmm. And so I've got 2 degrees, and then every time I come home from the pub drunk, my wife gives me the 3rd degree.
That's the most important one.
So my brother took a kind of slightly different path. After school, he went and did a joinery apprenticeship. 4 years later, he's got his qualification in joinery and carpentry. So he comes back and joins the business as well. So we've got a kind of surveying qualification, Peter with his building stuff, and my dad there with all the experience of business. We start really motoring the property company. And it was all about commercial property then.
This was back when? What year?
This was, so I left university in 2003. and property market was getting hot. And it just got hotter and hotter, and it did really well, because what we were really good at was finding things that were undervalued and something that we could add a bit of value to. So whether that was a physical redevelopment, knocking lumps at a building, putting it back together again, or maybe tweaking the lease, or taking an empty property, putting a good tenant in it with a good commercial contract in place, and that all these things add value in different ways. So we were good at kind of looking at that, and it was not big city centre buildings or anything like that. It's small local towns in about Ayrshire, Lanarkshire.
Just for the listeners, you're based in Ayrshire, aren't you?
Yeah. So I'm down in Ayrshire, and it did really well. And then the credit crunch came along, and that really, really hurt us. So we had funding from the banks to help us grow that, and it was going brilliant. I mean, the banks would not quite let it, but they were throwing money at us.
Did you have the hunting license, like they kind of described at the time? And
I remember. I remember one time we went down to an auction in London, and we bid for a property, and it was about 1.5 million, and we put our hand up and we got it. Hand went down ours, so we're legally obliged to buy it. We didn't have 1.5 million pounds. We had some money. But what we did is we phoned up the bank manager. We said, "Listen, we've got this," and it was a good deal. It was an investment portfolio. It had really good quality tenants. It was a really good site. Bank manager 5 minutes later said, "Yeah, fine, go for it." And we bought the thing in 4 weeks. But that kind of was the reality back then. You had a hunting license, but the banks just, they didn't give that to everyone. You had to kind of know what you're doing, and there was no commitment from them. They could easily just went, "Listen, no. We're not going to fund that one." But we did really well. They realised we were good at it. Then the credit crunch came along, and that was just a total game changer, because they just wanted out of everything. Yeah. They wanted out of property, they wanted out of all kinds of business. They just wanted cash in their bank account, and that obviously decimated the property market. So
up until the 2008 point, was it more commercial property that your company
was
involved?
All commercial. Yeah. It was all commercial, and
was that still hit hard in 2008?
Oh yeah. Very hard. The retail market is still recovering from it. I mean, rents on the high street, it took them a while to come down, but shops just started closing. Big one was Woolworths, that went down, and over time there was just this erosion of the high street. Then what's kind of happened since then, we've had the rise of online, and it's just really come at it from both sides. And so retail, I think it's starting to recover now, particularly because they've finally reassessed the rateable values for properties, retail, and they brought them down, because it's one of the biggest things that was really hard. If I've got an empty shop and a tenant says, "I want to rent that," I can do a deal on the lease. I can say, "Well, I'll give you a rent-free period, a discount." I can do whatever I have to do to get them in. I can't do that with the rates. It's a massive big tax that's just there. And it's only recently started to come down enough to make it viable for retail property to really kind of flourish again. It obviously is very different every town, and even every part of a town is different.
The rates went up on, sorry Nick, I just wondering, I heard the rates that went up on like your Amazon companies, like your industrial commercial property, but they're trying to obviously save the high street by reducing the high street rates, is that right?
Yeah, in theory the rate of value is based on property rental values, so it's not really a case of you win, you lose. It's basically whatever the rent should be is what the rateable value should be. So if rents drop, then rates should drop, but it took 10 years for it to happen.
How long did they get assessed?
Now, it used to be every 5 years.
Right.
The government then said, "I'll tell you what, we'll extend it for 2 years." So there was a 7-year period, and now it's every 3.
Right.
And they take the tone date the year before. So they are making moves in it, but I personally think that's one of the single biggest things that the government could do to help the high street, help commercial property, is look at rates, reassess it. We've got to pay tax, get that. We've got bills to pay in government, but it doesn't work for anyone. And it isn't very good for communities either. So personally, that's something that I think needs looked at.
That's a good point. So post 2008 global financial crisis, what condition did that leave you in then?
Well, it took us a while to basically emerge from that. And what happened is the banks put a lot of pressure on us to repay the loans. They were putting companies down all around us. Companies were just being put into administration, having assets stripped off them. And we really fought hard against that. And what I think worked for us is that we had a portfolio of about 100 shops. There was a lot of management in there, and we did it well. We never missed a payment of interest, capital, anything. We did everything we said we would. And I think the bank recognised that, and so they kind of left us alone. And then we managed to refinance by leaving that bank and going to another one. And that then gave us a platform to go and do other things. Around about the same time, we saw the value that was in the residential property market. And so we started investing there. And what we kind of realised is that for us in Ayrshire, our market, I know it's different in the cities, but our market is not flats and it's not kind of communal properties. We like detached or semi-detached mid-terraced housing where there's not really a lot of common owners, front garden, back garden.
Ex-local authority stock or?
Yeah, that perfect example. Ex-council houses, 2-3 bedroom, somewhere where a family can go and make that home their own. So they can go and live there for as long as they want. We'll do our bit as the landlord, they do their bit as the tenant. And we realised that there was something in that. So we invested there. There was a lot of value in terms of the pricing because there was a lot of repossessions. I mean, what had happened to us with commercial property would happen to everyone out there. And we did really well. And we just kept expanding on it.
Did you start off buying single units when you started residential to get experience, or did you start buying in bulk? Because I mean, to get hundreds of...
Well, most of the purchases are actually just single. We have bought portfolios, but they've not really been any bigger than maybe 7, 8, 9, 10 at a time.
Must have been a good process to buy that.
You must have really ramped up quite quickly. So if you look at it in terms of time scale, what was the kind of years that you were buying kind of the most property? Was that yourself that was going out and just doing the viewings with agents and stuff like
that? It probably really started to accelerate around about 2014, 15, and really up until last year, we were still... but one of the... As you do this, you start to build a reputation. So a estate agent would phone us, you've got a house, they know what we're looking for, they know what we'll pay for it, and we know we can complete quickly. They're not going to get mucked about. So we put an offer in and it gets accepted. They can just forget about it. So we built up a bit of a kind of reputation.
This is mainly around Ayrshire, yeah?
It's all Ayrshire. We don't have any residential property outside Ayrshire.
Right. So that helps as well. Absolutely. Locally, you're really building those relationships and they can rely on you.
Yeah. But essentially we go and find things we want, make sure it's the right kind of price, go and view it, make an offer. What we've also had to do on the back of that is essentially to create and build a property management company to service that.
Which is where I met you, at the Letwell,
That's right,
2017.
Yeah. So they brought in the qualification requirements for letting agents. So we did that course. Felt like I've been back at school a little bit. Doing that, but
you've obviously built up a team now, have you? A couple of people that look after the
so we've got an office manager, a couple of property managers, we've got a maintenance manager, and we've actually got maintenance operatives, and then we've got a kind of bank of contractors. But the reality is, when you've got 300 houses, there's always going to be something that needs fixed. There's always going to be someone leaving the house, a bit of a refurb needing done. So there's a need to have that in house. We've got the skill set to do that. And we've built that. So essentially, we've got an internal, a company that's delivering that for us.
Is that just for your own properties alone, or not for anyone else?
We don't do that for external.
And see, on the obviously scaling up that portfolio, I mean, at the same time, if you've got businesses running alongside that you're able to take funds, invest in the property, or can you talk a little bit about the financing? Because people are going to be listening to this. How did you manage to get that many properties in such a short space of time?
Yeah, well, on the property side, the magic formula for any property investment is buy low to start with. Do something to make it worth a lot more money. And then if you want to try and reinvest that, you can either sell it and get your cash out, or you can remortgage it or mortgage it and basically try and get your cash back out. So simple terms, you buy it for 50, you do a bit of work that costs you 10 or 20, it's now worth 100, you could probably get 70 or 80 back out from the bank. That goes into the next one. Do it again, repeat. And as long as your rents are servicing your mortgage payments, then you're doing fine.
So what's your criteria then in growing that portfolio quickly? Is it how much money you can pull back out to not leave in the portfolio? Because obviously, even leaving a few £1,000s in a few hundred properties soon amounts up to a whole lot of capital you need to invest, or is it more on yield or cash flow?
Well, when we look at a property, the first thing is really just getting the right price. In Ayrshire, up until about last year, the rents didn't move for 10 years, and so we knew what we would get for a 2-bedroom, what we would get for a 3-bedroom, what we would get for a 4-bedroom, and essentially we had a kind of, a value, and then we maybe work out if we need to do a bit of work to it. So we'd kind of do it from there. There's no big magic, kind of formula or big piece around it. What we've always been, as a family, keen to reinvest. So we would, how it would really work in reality is you'd maybe try and get a portfolio, maybe 10, 12 properties, and then go to a bank with a chunk, and then they'll give you X amount on the back of that. And that's how it's kind of been built up over time. We've also always ran a kind of contracting business. So originally, when Peter and I came out of our kind of studies, we started a home improvement company called Easton Kitchens and Bathrooms. We installed bathrooms and kitchens and housing. So if you wanted your bathroom done, we'd come round and do it for you. And we did that. That really took off. We did really well. But one of the issues we had is we found it really difficult to scale that business because it got to the point where we could maybe do 4 or 5 projects a week, and it was just then the wheels would fall off. It was so hard to manage. And also then the credit crunch and all the recession kicked in, and there was a lot less money kicking about. It was really hard to compete. So what we at that point, we had basically a bit of an epiphany in terms of energy efficiency, because we looked at it and we thought there's something in this going forward. We thought it's a type of business that there's going to be a large demand for it. It's also a business that there's a few barriers to entry. Anyone can't just walk into overnight. You have to be qualified, you have to receive accreditations. A lot of auditing and assessment goes on to make sure standards are met. And that's across all different parts of it. So a simple thing would be like, if you want to put a boiler in, you need a gas safe engineer. It's the same applies for insulation. You should really be using guys that have got their PAS 2030 qualification, or if it's a renewable thing, an MCA. So we realised there was a big opportunity here, and it's a business we could scale. So we started that in 2014, stopped doing the kitchens and bathrooms, went into that, and that just got off the flyer. Within a year, we had £1 million turnover, and that just grew and grew and grew. We got to COVID, really hurt us because we had to stop working. We couldn't do we just couldn't get into any houses. And then when kind of the lockdowns ended, I was expecting us to kind of spring back quite quickly to where we were before in terms of our turnover, but it wasn't. It was almost like starting the business again. But what we had done in the meantime is we spent a lot of time investing in our brand, our marketing, staff, IT, a lot of that kind of fundamental structure there, so that when we came back from lockdown, the business would be much bigger, and it's now starting to.
Why did it not spring back? Was it like the government funding wasn't there, or
no? It wasn't really that. It was just really difficult, I think, in terms of to pull sales in, and that kind of lockdown mentality just went on too long. There was a few gaps with the funding, but I wouldn't say that was the main reason. It was just really difficult, I think, because when you build a business, it gathers momentum over time. And we just lost that momentum. So we really had to kind of, roll the hill back up, roll the stone back up the hill.
And people's habits had changed, I suppose. They're now sitting in the house and they want to go out and enjoy themselves, not think about, we got to get the energy efficiency up in our house.
Exactly. But now that has changed. When COP came to Glasgow, everyone kind of went green. We're going to green this and green that. And we saw a lot of that, and we kind of participated in a lot. But the reality is, no one actually did a lot. There's just a lot of talk, greenwashing, a lot of talk. Yeah. Last year, when the energy crisis kicked in, when it actually started hitting people in their pocket, phone didn't stop ringing.
Right.
And that is the reality of a lot of these things. So particularly around property, EPC bandings are going to come into play. Yeah.
And I want to get on, Stephen, I want to get on all that stuff in a second, but can we just finish up on the property portfolio? So, like, how many residential units do you think, houses do you think you own now?
Roughly? We've got about 300 houses.
So, see in that portfolio, a lot of people think that's massive numbers, and it is to me and Stephen as well. Like, when you are coming into this, higher interest rate environment and stuff like that, people are looking at the portfolio, seeing how they're geared and all the rest of it. Yeah. What loan to value would you say you're sitting at across that portfolio now?
Oh, that's a good question. I couldn't tell off the top of my head, but we're probably kicking around about 50%, I think.
Which is
so
a good place. That's pretty safe.
I think when interest rates go up, it can get quite challenging, particularly if you are quite highly geared, and that's when the pressures can be really difficult to manage. What I would say is you've got to make sure you're on top of your property management, getting the rents in, just really being quite strict with your cash flow. Unfortunately, interest rates, it's one of these costs that it's hard. You can't really just cut it. You've either got to pay back debt and get rid of it. You can't renegotiate very much on it. So you've got to accept you've got a new cost of business there. That may be reflective in your rents and other things as well. So it's something you really need to be on top of it, and that's what caught a lot of people out in the credit crunch in 2008. High gearing, and then what happens is the property values drop, and next thing you know, you owe more money to the bank than the thing's actually worth, and that's when you're at negative equity. And that's not to say that it can kill you, but it's not a great position to be in.
In 2023, as we stand here, is the buy-to-let property investing, in Ayrshire, does that still make sense from a financial point of view?
We actually put a little bit of a pause on our acquisitions when Liz Truss announced her budget and the kind of economy went a wee bit haywire. We thought, let's just, take a step back and see what's happening here. And we've not really re-engaged with the market significantly since then. Are there still deals out there? Yes. Will there be deals in the future? Yes. I think it's just a case of really trying to get a feel for where the rent's going, what's happening with all the kind of rent freeze and the government kind of policies, because that's still a little bit of a grey area, I think, of what direction that's all going in. But I would say the fundamentals are there. The letting demand is still high. If we put a property on the market to let, there's still got a lot of demand for that, so that's good.
What lessons did you take in from 2008 that you guys were active? I mean, I know not quite in residential, but in commercial, and are you applying to today's economy?
One of the main ones, I would say, well, the reason why it affected us in the way that it did was because the banks were feeling the pain and they pushed the pain onto us. And we really had most of our loans to two banks. Most of it was actually to RBS. And when you owe one bank a lot of money, they've got a lot of control and a lot of power over the business, and they could, flick a switch and pull the whole thing down. So the main lesson for me is don't put all your eggs in one basket. Break up your funding if you can. And where it can be difficult is, banks are always looking for business, and they will always, try and coax you over. But I think if you could try and split that up a bit, and it depends depends what extent you want to go. But if you can kind of structure your business so that it's maybe a little bit separate, just so if something does happen, it's not going to pull everything away from you. So the key thing for me from that is try and take that control and that power back, because it's a difficult position to be in and to get out of. And I know a lot of companies that they couldn't. We managed to do it, but it's a real challenge there. I'd also say the second thing is, out of every kind of big economic recession, there's always opportunity in there. Now, it might not be apparent straight away, but there will be opportunities because values will start to drop, or there'll be something will just start to tweak. And what you really need to do is take a bit of a risk at that time. There's an old saying, I'll probably get it wrong, but I think most of the stockbrokers actually make more money in recessions than when the thing's flying.
So you think it meant like getting your ducks in a row before it be a bit liquid?
And don't be afraid. If everyone's saying, the world's come to an end, that's probably the time to act.
It's like the Warren Buffett, isn't it? The quote, it's be greedy when others are fearful, be fearful when others are greedy.
That's really it.
Aye. So, obviously, it sounds like obviously the main focus has been green home systems. So your business driving that forward, which is great to hear you're doing well again. There's a lot of stuff in the press at the moment about how we're going to get to this net zero and the goals, ambitions that the government keeps setting, and for us as landlords as well here in the room, they keep kind of changing the goalposts. First of all, it was EPC was supposed to kick in back in, I think it was 2023 minimum EPC requirements. Now it's delayed till 2025. And then so I think as we stand here, because we did an episode on this, so it's 2025, there's going to be a minimum EPC requirement of C for newly let properties, and it's 2028, if I can remember, for all existing tenanted properties. So by 2028, everything has got to be a minimum EPC C. Do you think that's going to happen in those timescales?
Yes, I do. Also, it goes beyond that. And it's not just property investors, it's property owners they're trying to extend it out to. So if you live in a house that you own and you want to sell that, you're going to be told you can't sell that, or someone can't buy it if it doesn't meet EPC bands. Now, when I talk about energy efficiency stuff, I'm quite passionate about it for a few reasons. You know, it is important that we get to net zero for climate change, reduce energy costs. So I kind of believe in all that stuff. But see if you don't, you think climate change is a whole bunch of mumbo jumbo. The reality as a landlord, you just need to accept the fact it's coming down the tracks and you need to do something about it. So burying your head in the sand is not really going to work for you. EPC bandings, all they are really is just a rating of how efficient your property is. Social housing have got EIS standards, which are basically the same thing. They've got to get EPC band B by 2032. And all social housing is just a few years ahead of where private rented will get to. So I think, C is just the start of it. And you'll get, before you know it, it's going to be 10 years' time. It's going to be 2033, and we're all going to have, we're talking about trying to get to A's and B's. So the earlier you can start, the better. What I would say, there's no magic solution to this, and anyone that says that, this is how you just, transform everything in your portfolio from here to here, what you've got to do is firstly just recognise, where are you? How many properties you got? Right, what are the EPC bandings for each one of them? That's the starting thing. So you need to understand where you are with it. If your EPC is over 10 years old, you need to get a new one anyway. But the reality is that the way the EPCs are calculated will have moved on a little bit. So it's probably worth getting that reassessed. What you then got to understand is how an EPC is actually calculated. Now, I'm not bore you to death with the intricacies of it, but essentially what an EPC does is it says what insulation's in the wall, what insulation's in the roof, what the window's made of, what's the heating system, puts it all into a formula, and then it kicks out a number. Now, an EPC assessor is called a domestic energy assessor. They do not have X-ray glasses. So when they walk into a flat or a house and they look at the wall, they don't know what's behind that. So the only way and they're not allowed to make assumptions that there's something in there if they can't prove it. So if you know that your house is insulated, it's got cavity wall, internal wall, all that kind of stuff, you need to be letting your domestic energy assessor know. So when he does your assessment, he can put it in, because if you don't tell him and he doesn't know, he'll just put it as the basic assumption that it's not insulated, or it's insulated to the building standards of when the property was built. So if you've got an old flat, 100-year-old flat in the middle of Glasgow, there were no building standards when that was created. If you've done internal wall insulation and made it all brilliant, but then it's all decorated, the DA won't know unless you tell them. So this is what I would suggest you do, is you start an energy efficiency file for every property. So in the same way that you've maybe got a compliance file for your gas certs, your electrical certs, all that kind of stuff, start an energy efficiency file. You've probably got it already. You'll have a boiler manual maybe saved on a computer. That's the first thing, because a boiler's important and a part of the EPC. Any work you're doing, take a record. So when you buy a set of windows, keep the receipt, keep the spec, the U values, all that information, get it in the file. And then when you get your EPC done, reassessed, you can say to the guy, this is it. And he needs to see the evidence. You can't just tell him, that's not good enough. He needs to see, and he'll take a record of that. So if he gets audited, he can say, well, this is the information that I was provided. And that's, and so that it's all correct. So that's the kind of first thing, is just get your house in order a wee bit. The next thing is, every single time you're doing a bit of refurb, I would be thinking about energy efficiency. You do not need to go in straight away and rip everything to bits and get it up to an A or a B overnight. You can do it a bit at a time. See if you're putting a new bathroom in, get the external walls insulated. You don't need to do everything at once, but you're ripping the thing out anyway. Get insulation board in there on that wall, and then get that recorded for your energy efficiency file. When you do the kitchen, same thing. You're doing and so you start to build this picture up. And slowly you'll get to that point. Same with boilers. And you probably keep that with manuals, but maybe just have a look at the efficiency of boilers. Don't just always go for maybe the cheapest option. Maybe go for something a little bit higher spec, just so you're going to get that
Question on boilers, right? So there's been some talk, I think, what is it, by 2030 or something like that? We're not going to be allowed to install gas boilers. That's the kind of objective. That's the goal. So why are we not? Why is the government not saying at the moment for all new build houses we're going to ban gas boilers? Why are they not starting now?
Well, they are, but I think it's starting. I don't know. It's a year or so. I don't know the information on that, but as they're starting with new builds.
The building control officer actually said for me for Aberdeen sign off last week, said that if you'd applied for this warrant in 2023 and you'd put in gas heating, you wouldn't have been allowed. So it must be. I don't know if in all councils, but that was in Aberdeen.
And are heat pumps the answer then? Because there was a podcast you did with I think it was Willie Hockey. That I listened to, and there was a wee bit of debate there. I think Willie's on the kind of like heat pumps are not the answer. You were kind of defending the heat pumps. So what's your opinion again, just for the listeners, on heat pumps?
Heat pump, well, just to put it into context, a gas boiler burns gas. It's a fossil fuel. Fossil fuels have gone out the door. So there needs to be an alternative to that. So that's the first thing, is we need to understand boilers are not the long-term solution. What a heat pump does is it works a little bit like a fridge in reverse. It takes cold air and it uses pressure and thermodynamics and that stuff and creates hot water. And that then passes into the house through pipes and things like that. The main difference though is that a gas boiler can get your hot water up to 78 degrees like that. An air source heat pump, to work efficiently, will probably bring your hot water up to kind of 50 degrees. And the problem with that is if you've got a really old, uninsulated, drafty building, 50 degrees will not cut the mustard. So I'm sorry I can't give you a straight answer on it, because there isn't a straight answer. If your house has got insulation and it's energy efficient in terms of the building fabric, heat pump will work brilliantly.
And what about all the tenement flats and that in Glasgow? We're going to have heat pump units on the back of every one of them, or how's that going to look in the future?
It's difficult. I don't think the technology's there yet for it. I have seen projects where the heat pump has been screwed to the wall at height, first, second floor. How the engineer is going to go and service that in the future, I don't know. But you've got to recognise that when you're putting a heat pump in, you need to put a cylinder in. You also, in most cases, need to replumb the property, put bigger radiators in. Because of that lower temperature, you need more surface area to heat the property, and that requires those changes. At the moment, it's very difficult in flats, and we're not putting them into flats. We're putting them into houses. And what we do, though, first thing is we do the fabrics. It's fabric first. Get your property insulated. So from a landlord's point of view, at the moment, I wouldn't get too worked up about the heating. I would concentrate on the building fabric, insulation. If you don't have the loft insulated to 300 millimetres, that's 2 big layers in your loft. Get that done. It's really cheap, easy, quick to do. When you're insulating your wall, when you're doing things to insulate your walls, and then you can look at insulating the floor as well. Windows, double glazing, insulated doors as well. That's the main thing I would be concentrating on right now. You can access grants for that. There's a few things kicking about, and this is where it can get complicated. For most landlords, they might be able to access the energy company obligation, which is eco-funding, and that is where, if your tenant basically is in receipt of a qualifying state benefit, then the house becomes eligible. And then there needs to be a few calculations about, is there enough funding available for that property? But we do work with a lot of landlords. At the moment, really, see if you've got electric heating, and your tenant qualifies, you probably will be able to access a grant for work there in a flat. So that's the kind of stuff I would be focusing on at the moment. And energy efficiency is a moving feast. There isn't just one thing happening at the moment. You've really got to keep, on top of it, all the changes. And so I would start, energy efficiency file, where are you at the moment? And then just keep on top of it. So when the changes come along, you're ready for them.
Great. And obviously your business, Green Home Systems, how can, if people are listening to this, how could you help? Is there potential there for landlords to get in touch?
Yeah. So if you go into our website, which is greenhomesystems.co.uk, and there's a few different pages, some for landlords, and then the different products, and really just got to contact us. And then what we can do is we can do an assessment over the phone to start with, and then we can send a technician out and do a proper assessment of the property, and then also try and help access that funding, because we, as a PAS accredited business, we can actually draw that funding down for landlords. So just contact us through the website, and then we can help them do that. energy efficiency is a complicated process, particularly when it comes to grants, but we are here to make it easier for everyone. And we're doing a lot of good work. In fact, every single property we've worked on recently, we've got to A and B in terms of energy efficiency, because we're doing a big refit, fabric first, and then we're moving putting some renewable project. And in pretty much 99% of cases, it's grant funded. So our average project size in green home systems is about £40,000, all grant funded. No one's having to contribute to that, and we're getting properties finishing at A and B. So.
Just lastly on that question, so I know we're tight for time, but these goals that the government are setting out, I agree with you. It has to happen. It has to happen. It's the only way. Net zero has got to be achieved. But as the private rented sector, as landlords, if the government are asking landlords to fork out 10 grand or something like that on the property, bring it up to standard, is that going to, do you see that that's going to be further demise of the private rented sector? Is this going to reduce the amount of private, stock?
I think it will be one of a few issues. I think on its own, probably not. There's always going to be a need for private rented properties, and that's where there's possibly an opportunity, because there will be a lot of landlords that just say, listen, this isn't for me anymore. I can't cope with this. I don't know how to do it. So they're going to exit the market. That, to me, is an opportunity for other people to step in. What I think will probably happen is when people realise that there's going to be a big divergence in their EPC unless they spend a lot of money on it and they won't be able to sell their property or rent it. These things are going to come on the market, and they should probably attract a little bit of a discount to value. And you might start to find that there's a couple of kind of property markets starting to be created. It's not going to happen overnight, but ultimately, once it starts to impact people in their pockets, and there's always been talk about stamp duty, so LBTT having an EPC assessment against it. I was speaking to the chief executive of Lloyds Banking Group the other week, and he suggested a solution is that you get a stamp duty credit. So if, for example, when you buy a property, let's say you spend so much on stamp duty, if you do energy efficiency works within a period of 2 months, you get that money back as a credit.
Incentives.
Yeah. So lots of stuff's going to happen, I think. We don't know what, but there will be a combination of carrot and stick. And so you just want to understand, how to make it work for yourself.
Yeah, it's an exciting sector to be involved in, and we hugely appreciate your time for coming and chatting about it today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much, Stephen, for joining us. Really good.
You're welcome.
Great.